We're diving into a period in the mid-20th century, a technological and strategic era that just permanently changed the whole concept of war.
We really are. We're talking about inventions so powerful, they actually forced world leaders to stop using military force and start relying, well, entirely on diplomacy.
So our mission today is to unpack a few huge concepts. First, how the most devastating bombs ever were built.
Then, how we figured out how to send them across oceans using rockets.
And finally, these strange, almost terrifying strategies that leaders created, like mutually assured destruction, just to make sure these weapons were never, ever used.
Exactly.
So let's start with the weapon itself. We have to understand this massive, it was an exponential leap in destructive power that came with the hydrogen bomb.
Right. This is where the physics completely flips the script. The atomic bombs from World War II, they worked by fission, they split heavy atoms apart. But the H-bomb, that's a whole different process. It's fusion.
And fusion is the key because,
Well,
what does that mean exactly?
it means you're fusing together lighter elements, hydrogen isotopes, under just incredible heat and pressure. And that process releases a vastly, vastly greater amount of energy.
So it's not just a bigger bomb, it's a different kind of power.
Think of it this way. Fission is powerful, sure, but fusion is literally the power of the sun, but, harnessed in a weapon.
And because of that, the scale of destruction just changes completely. We stop measuring power in kilotons, which is thousands of tons of TNT.
And we start measuring it in megatons.
A megaton is a million tons of TNT.
Right. And to give you some perspective on that, historians estimate that maybe 3 megatons of conventional bombs were used by everyone during all of World War II. A single H-bomb could have more power than that.
Wow. So one weapon could equal all the explosives from the biggest war in history up to that point.
Precisely. We are talking about single blasts that can flatten almost any structure and just destroy entire cities. The destructive radius is measured in miles.
And the U.S. proved this was possible pretty early on.
They did. They detonated their first experimental device in the Pacific back in 1952. It proved this physics nightmare was actually possible.
And of course, as soon as one side could do it, the pressure was immediately on the other side to match it.
Oh, absolutely. The arms race demanded parity. So the Soviet Union, they quickly followed with their own successful fusion test. And that just confirmed for everyone that we had entered a new and frankly much more dangerous age.
But, having a bomb isn't enough if your enemy is on the other side of the world. Old bomber planes were suddenly just too slow, too easy to shoot down.
That's right, especially carrying these new, massive fusion weapons. So engineers had to focus on developing rockets that could send these really heavy warheads across oceans without using planes at all.
And the technical challenge must have been immense.
It was. You had to build a vehicle that could lift that payload, reach incredible speed, and, somehow survive getting into the upper atmosphere.
And these early rockets were just colossal, weren't they?
They were monsters. Most of them stood over 100 feet tall on the launch pad, taller than many buildings.
And to get something that big off the ground, you need a special kind of fuel.
You do. They had to rely on liquid fuels, and this isn't like gasoline for your car. These were complex, often really volatile chemicals that provided a steady, powerful push for several minutes straight.
And that sustained push is what let them break free of the atmosphere.
Exactly. So military planners basically took that devastating fusion warhead and they combined it with this new, giant, powerful rocket. And that combination is what we now call the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, the ICBM.
The ICBM was the real game changer then. It basically made geography irrelevant as a defense.
It did. These things were designed to travel over 3,400 miles, continent to continent. And they don't fly through the atmosphere like a plane. They follow what's called a suborbital path.
Okay, a suborbital path. What does that actually look like?
Yeah. Well, think of it less like a flight and more like a giant cannonball being thrown into space. The rocket boosts the missile way up, high above the atmosphere into the vacuum.
Well, there's no air resistance.
Exactly. So it travels thousands of miles, and then gravity just pulls it back down onto its target at tremendous speed.
And because it's coming down so high and so fast, we're talking thousands of miles per hour, it's almost impossible to stop.
Precisely. The first successful ICBM flight was in 1957. And the crucial thing to understand here is the time. This tech meant a nation could strike an enemy, a distant enemy, in less than 30 minutes from launch.
Less than 30 minutes. That is a terrifyingly short window.
It became the single defining factor in all military planning that followed.
30 minutes to decide the fate of the world. Okay, so that speed means you need two things. You need incredible physical protection for your own weapons, and you need a foolproof instant alert system.
That's right. If you're going to rely on these things for deterrence, you have to make sure they survive a surprise attack. So this led to the construction of these massive underground structures called silos.
And when you say silo, you're not talking about a farm structure. These are something else entirely.
Not at all. These are deep vertical tubes, hundreds of feet deep, made of layers of reinforced concrete and heavy steel plating. They were designed to withstand the immense pressure and heat from a nuclear explosion happening nearby.
So even if the ground is literally exploding around it, the missile inside could, theoretically, survive and launch.
That was the idea. And you had technicians living and working down there in command centers next to the silos, constantly monitoring everything, ready to launch at a moment's notice.
What an incredibly high-pressure life. But okay, waiting in a concrete hole isn't enough, because an enemy can eventually figure out where all your silos are.
They can.
So if they launch a surprise first strike, how do you guarantee you can hit them back? This is where that idea of a second strike comes in, right?
That's the strategic puzzle the submarines solved. The only way to guarantee you can retaliate is to put your weapons on something that's almost impossible to find.
Submarines.
Specialized submarines that use nuclear reactors for power. And that's a key detail.
Why is a nuclear reactor so important for this?
Because it lets the sub stay completely underwater for months. They can travel thousands of miles without ever surfacing or refueling. Hidden deep in the ocean, they become, well, virtually invisible.
So even if every single land-based missile, every silo, every airbase is destroyed in a surprise attack,
those subs are still out there, hidden, ready to launch their missiles in retaliation. This second strike capability is the absolute core of nuclear strategy. It makes a first strike suicidal for the attacker.
that guaranteed response is what gives the whole strategy its teeth.
But you have to know you're under attack first. Let's go back to that 30-minute clock. How did you watch the skies for a launch?
With colossal radar stations. They were built in strategic places, usually in cold northern regions, to create a constant watch network over the pole. And these systems could spot a launch almost as soon as it happened.
Yes, even from the other side of the world. The radar would detect the intense heat and speed of a rocket, and then it would instantly calculate its trajectory, its speed, and most importantly, its predicted landing point.
And that's the information that gives leaders that tiny 15 to 30-minute window to decide what to do.
Exactly. The pressure on the people in those command centers must have been paralyzing. You're watching a screen, knowing the fate of millions hangs on whether that blip is a flock of birds or an incoming warhead.
The risk of a false alarm seems immense.
It was. And that's where computers became absolutely crucial, helping to filter out natural interference, cross-reference data, and verify if a threat was real. It was a high-stakes digital balancing act to prevent accidental war.
Okay, let's shift from the hardware of destruction to the strategy of non-use. With these weapons that guarantee mutual ruin, planners developed these paradoxical strategies. Let's start with the early one, massive retaliation.
Massive retaliation was the strategy of the 1950s, and it was built on a policy of, frankly, overreaction.
Overreaction.
Yes. The policy stated that any aggression by an enemy, no matter how small, even a conventional one, would be met with a massive, devastating nuclear counterattack, launching everything.
So the goal wasn't just to deter a nuclear attack, it was to use the threat of total annihilation to stop any kind of conflict from starting.
That's it, exactly. You convince your opponent that the cost of starting any fight, big or small, is just too hard to survive.
But wait a minute. Isn't it a huge contradiction that the solution to preventing nuclear war was to build more nuclear weapons?
It is, but as both sides built thousands of warheads, and as they both perfected that survivable second strike with the subs and silos, the strategy evolved. It became something even more extreme, mutually assured destruction. Man-D.
Man-D.
Yeah.
How is that different from massive retaliation?
Well, massive retaliation threatened nuclear war over conventional fights. MAD, on the other hand, just acknowledges the simple, terrifying reality that by the 1960s, both sides had enough weapons and the means to deliver them to totally destroy each other. A second strike was now guaranteed.
So a first strike is basically suicide.
Precisely. The strategy is based on the guaranteed ruin of both sides. And the consequence of this is the realization that there are no winners in a nuclear exchange.
So war itself becomes unthinkable.
Right. Strange as it sounds, MAD forced leaders to rely on diplomacy and communication because the alternative was the end of civilization.
It's the most high-stakes, uncomfortable piece imaginable. So what's the legacy of this whole era, beyond just the Cold War itself?
Well, one major ongoing effect is proliferation. Over time, the knowledge of how to build these bombs spread to other nations.
Which changes the power balance everywhere.
Drastically. Every new country with these weapons increases the global risk of an accident or a miscalculation. So international organizations were formed to monitor nuclear materials and try to prevent that spread. It's still a top priority today.
And we also have to talk about the environmental cost, the testing.
Thousands of tests were conducted
Right.
in the atmosphere, underground, in the ocean, and these explosions released huge amounts of radioactive materials, what we call fallout.
And that stuff traveled around the world.
It did. It contaminated testing sites for decades, food supplies, water, and scientists quickly realized this radiation was harmful to all life.
And that concern eventually led to some real diplomatic breakthroughs, didn't it?
It did. Public pressure over the environment led to treaties to stop testing weapons in the open air. This was one of the first big successes of what we call arms control.
Speaking of arms control, as the sheer number of missiles became overwhelming, diplomacy had to step in.
It became essential. Both sides realized the danger, so they held these meetings that resulted in treaties to limit production and even destroy some of their older weapons, with inspectors watching to make sure it happened.
So even the bitterest rivals could find a way to cooperate when survival was on the line.
Absolutely. The agreements showed that cooperation was possible. They banned weapons from places like outer space, and they helped to slowly, carefully lower the global temperature.
And finally, it's easy to focus on the danger, but the technology from this race, it's literally all around us today.
That's the powerful hidden legacy. The rocket science perfected for ICBMs, the engines, the guidance systems that led directly to the rockets used for the moon landings.
Wow.
And even more directly, modern systems we use every day like GPS and satellite communications, they rely entirely on the rocketry and the orbital mechanics developed during the Cold War.
So what does this all mean for us today? The nuclear arms race was a period of incredible technological escalation that redefined strategy and forced powerful nations to rely on communication, not conflict, to survive.
Right. And understanding the logic behind these terrifying strategies, Amity, the second strike, that 30-minute window, it just reminds us that our technological progress is always tied to geopolitical responsibility. Cooperation is the only real long-term strategy for humanity.
Good luck with your studies.